Welcome to the Reinventor's Mindset, insights about transformation with leaders who've done it from the inside. I'm Ashton Jones and I'm writing Bold Water, a book about transformation. Today I'm speaking with Monty Hamilton. Monty co-founded UBank inside NAB, Australia's first digital bank, then moved to Telstra, where he co-founded Belong, which they built in just 8 weeks. He's since led digital transformation at PwC and TELUS in Canada, and now looks after Asia and global partnerships at TELUS Digital. Monty is one of those rare people who has a habit of walking into large, established organisations and building new things from the inside. And that's the heart of what this show is about. Welcome, Monty. Let's dive in.
Well, thanks, Ashton. It's great to join you. It's always telling these stories, but incredibly rewarding, if not challenging times, and got to meet and work with some wonderful people on the journey so far.
And Monty, you're coming to us today from Singapore, so I thought maybe a good place to start might be if you could tell us a little bit about TELUS Digital and what I understand is a recently changed or expanded role.
Yeah, thanks, Ashton. So yeah, I'm in Singapore. Core to TELUS's journey over the past 20 years has been an incredible global business that delivers digital customer care, AI and data solutions, a big trust and safety business, which really are the safeguards of the internet that we use today, and underpinning all of those services is a large tech and digital practice. I'm looking after Asia as a region, and I run our partnerships worldwide, so we're very fortunate to work with a number of the hyperscalers and large partners that we go to market with.
Fantastic. And I'm going to take you back a little bit, Monty, if it's okay, and just I was hoping to understand a little bit more about your time at both UBank and Belong. Maybe I'll start with Belong. I recently led a launch of a new product. I was pretty proud of it because it took us about 8 months, and that was a bit of a land speed record for financial services in Australia. But Belong you did in 8 weeks from brief to launch. How is that even possible?
Well, I think that you'll find the red thread through any of these stories, Ashton, is amazing people can do amazing things. And what I would say is Belong is yet another example of people in action. So if you take yourself back to the launch period of Belong, what are we now? Well over a decade ago, Telstra was facing a daunting but also exciting challenge, which was a post-NBN world. There were some regulatory mandates on the industry, so all incumbent providers would effectively need to renew the customer relationships they had. And if you're one of the larger providers, that's pretty scary because that inertia of keeping your customer base is important. Telstra was looking to diversify the customer base and find new ways to expand, and in a pretty regulated environment that is telecom in Australia, often for very, very good reason, of course. Acquisitions were few and far between. It was very difficult for number one, number two, number three player to add inorganically, and so a decision was made to pursue an organic build for a more direct-to-market customer value proposition. So Telstra is famous for a wonderful multi-channel service experience, and has done that for many decades now. As a government-owned business, but of course more recently as a publicly traded business. And from that extent, Belong was an incredibly exciting journey to get into market very, very quickly with a direct, that is a digitally distributed product, not dissimilar to the principles of what we use to bring UBank to market. So we assembled a team very quickly. I remember coming out of some discussions on a Thursday and Friday, and getting asked, well, what would you need to do that? And by Monday we'd partnered up, found a new office location to move folks into, handpicked some folks from across the organisation, stood down from our day jobs, so to speak, and moved across into to get this business humming. So that all culminated in a launch about 8 weeks later, and a pretty rapidly growing business from there.
Yeah, so you touched on Monty UBank. So, UBank was built inside NAB, Belong inside Telstra. Was there a pattern, I suppose, there around, what do large organisations have to do, or what do they have to tolerate almost to let something new get born inside?
It's the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunity, because when you think around any large organisation, there is incredible talent available, and it's not always represented by hierarchy in the business. One of the parallels, Ashton, I use for corporate change within an organisation is what happens in incident management, particularly IT incident management. What often happens in that environment is hierarchy gets out of the way, and the people who know how to get things done get things done. That is, fix an IT or technology incident. And so that tends to shine if you, but it's very hard to pre-plan that, right? How do you find the right people?
Yes.
How do you remove the very well-meaning hierarchy from the organisation, so you can just apply the best talent at a particular challenge, or harnessing an opportunity. And the parallels are really simple, which is a bit of a recipe, right? Which is you need to have enough space, that is both physically and structurally, to be able to create something new within an organisation. A lot of organisations, they're built for incremental change, like where 1, 3, 5% growth or cost reductions. They're the annual targets. It's double figures, it's outrage. How can we do 10%? And then when you're building something new, it's kind of, you're measuring things in hundreds and thousands of percent. So you need a mindset that can cope with that. You need the space to do it, both physically and structurally. You also need the team, right? And so, yes, the mindset is there, but you need a diverse team that can not just solve very narrow problems, but actually are capable of working better laterally than perhaps they are vertically within a structure. And in big corporates where you have 10, 15, 20,000 people, you often have very senior people that have quite a narrow focus, because a large organisation can sustain a senior leader running a narrow portfolio. But a small business, a startup team, you need some really strong generalist skills. So there's a few red threads there that help bring this to life. The organisation large organisations are set to reject these things. So thick skin and resilience is probably the number one trait.
I love that. I suppose, analogy you used around how people get together to resolve, Sev 1 incidents and things like that, right? Because there's a burning platform, so the right people with the right skill set have the permission to really solve the problem, right? And I think there's a lot we can learn from that philosophy when it comes to building new things inside.
Yeah, there's a real purity in it. There's a real purity, if you take yourself back to, and any listeners and viewers here, like, take yourself back to a Sev 1 call. It's 3 a.m. in the morning. There's all sorts of very senior people on this call, but hierarchy is irrelevant, right? The voice that is helpful is the voice that contributes to the solution, or has an experience of having seen that film or seen around that corner. And you can be on there senior, all cranky and yelling, but it fixes nothing. In fact, the very best incident management processes that I've been a part of actually explicitly segregate executive updates from those who are working on the incident, because that commingling serves only to prolong the incident or outage.
And you touched on as well, Monty, this sort of concept of, sometimes in large organisation there's some antibodies that can tend to reject reject change. And I'm interested around how you've thought about velocity when delivering large scale transformation or when building startups. Do you think speed is a strategy, a survival mechanism? Do you need to move fast because you want to or because you had to? Otherwise, if you didn't, then the antibodies would kick in and kind of swarm. I'm just sort of interested how you think about velocity when delivering change,
Yeah.
when to move fast, when to take a
Uh,
beat. Yeah.
well, speed is essential because, I mean, I absolutely subscribe to the progress over perfection, starting somewhere approach. And
Me
everyone
too.
now lives and
Yeah.
breathes and understands that an MVP, minimum viable product, or that this analogy and this is now mainstream discussion in business, right? But you go back to 2008 when we launched UBank, which is over 17 years ago now.
Mm,
Concepts of MVP were not necessarily mainstream, and certainly not mainstream in corporate. So that approach, I mean, if you've got something, then you're less likely to be shut down. That's the kind
mm,
of jocular version of it. But if you've got something, you've got something to learn from, and you've got something to build on,
mm,
right? And a lot of organizations have to deal with scale on a daily basis, right? If you think about the banking landscape, the big banks are measured in millions and billions of transactions. The telecoms are measured in, millions of customers and billions of calls and data sessions, and large, infrastructure, right? Scale is very much an asset for a large
mm,
organization, but scale is an asset at a different end of the spectrum for a startup and growing business, because you can actually manage a lot of the volume in ways that at a
mm,
smaller end that you wouldn't have to industrialize until later, in your history. I mean, when we launched UBank, uh, we had term deposits. We brought term deposits back as a sexy product, and our
mm,
shortest term was a 30-day term deposit. And we had very limited rollover processes in place when we launched the business. We had break processes for those who needed to break and access their funds, but we had 30 days once we launched to perfect our rollover process, our organic rollover process, because the first organic rollover was going to be at least 30 days after the first term deposit we sold. So often those sorts of speed and progress over perfection, Ashton, they get confused with
mm,
cavalier and high risk taking
mm,
approach. That's a convenient narrative, but it's not
mm,
true. There's a very, very big difference between being lawful, compliance with regulations, and taking the necessary security and privacy steps, and being able to be
mm,
agile and efficient and fast to market, than there is taking months and months and months to build an automated process for 3 or 4 people,
mm.
that perhaps another player in the industry has had to industrialize for 3 or 4 million people.
Mm, mm. I actually love that reframe that, it's often safer to start small, move fast and start small, and it's not cavalier at all, right? I'm going to stay with UBank if it's okay. Full disclosure, I'm a UBank customer still to this day. I was one of the early adopters back then, and around that era, after UBank, there were quite a few neobanks that kind of popped up both externally and within large institutions. I'm curious what you think were the ingredients of success that allowed UBank to not just be, the first of its kind, but also still to be alive as a customer proposition to this day.
Yeah, well, I mean, hats off to the team now. I mean, like I said, it's over 17 years ago, right? So,
Yeah.
full credit to the team that have taken UBank forward. There's a great sense of pride I have when I see, I'm watching the Big Bash and the team, sponsored by Belong, or
Yeah.
then there's an ad that comes up UBank, and you're like, hey, we kind of named those. The story
Yeah.
is quite funny, and but if you go back to the UBank journey, I mean, UBank, we set out to build a mortgage, a direct and digital mortgage proposition. And if you take yourself back to early 2008, late 2007, that was a good place to be, right? Because the cash rate was very high. People were paying, very high single digits on their mortgage, and we felt a digital proposition was going to afford some business model efficiencies that would allow a really strong price proposition in market. Fast forward to the middle of 2008, things got a little bit bumpy. We started to see and hear on the news things about, credit default swaps and mortgage stress in the US and people
It's a
were
crazy
about
era.
Fannie
Yeah.
Mae. Yeah, and they're like, who is Freddie Mae and who is Freddie Mac? And then fast forward to September, and we were going headfirst into a global financial crisis. Well, we launched UBank in October 2008, and the decision we took
Wow.
probably 12 weeks before that launch was to shift from a mortgage business, a digital mortgage business, to a retail deposit business, because with the incredible experience of National Australia Bank, we were able to get guidance for non-economists like me that cash would be a flight to safety, and people would move out of equities, and that cash and the bank that had the most stable balance sheet would be in a really strong place to withstand some of the doomsday predictions. Now, we didn't quite know how complex and how challenging the GFC would be, but what's fascinating about this chapter is the scale of disruption that we launched into with UBank, right? So to give you some perspective here, we launched in October 2008. A few days after we launched, on 8th of October, the cash rate dropped by 100 basis points. Less than a month later, the
Wow.
cash rate dropped by 75 basis points. Then, less than a month later, the cash rate dropped by 100 basis points. In February of 2009, the cash rate dropped by another 100 basis points. And by April, the cash rate had sort of stabilised by dropping another 25 basis points down to 3%, the target RBA target cash rate. So in the space of 6 months after our launch, the cash rate had moved from 600 points to 300 points. And I'm no historian of the history of the Reserve Bank and target cash rates, but I don't think we'd seen anything like that. And so not only did we launch a business shift a business from a lending product to a deposit product, we launched it into one of the most staggering tailwinds for a cash business that you could ever have. And as a result, it was very much all hands on deck. We were out there raising cash deposits for NAB on NAB's balance sheet under the UBank brand. On or off the record, a number of folks have been only too excited to relive the stories about having this cash generation machine at a time where people were fleeing equities, flight to safety, and all on the back of a government guarantee, a government deposit guarantee, which was, I think, up to $1 million Australian dollars.
Yeah. It's I'm a huge believer in this concept that crisis is an opportunity first and foremost, right? Whenever there's a crisis or whenever there's a challenge, how you lean into that, respond to that, creates real opportunity. And I started my career around that whole time. Like I was at Deloitte as a cadet, and I really remember the era as something where people were really looking for help, looking for ways to solve problems, looking for ways to kind of move beyond the crisis, if you like. And
Yeah.
it's amazing to hear you rattle off those statistics at the time, because even having lived through it, I think we tend to have short memories and we forget those.
Well, it's like
those
talking about
sort
the
of
pandemic
economic
now, right?
circumstances. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
It was 7 years ago.
I mean,
The pandemic was 7 years ago.
yeah, yeah. You asked about the experience, like the other banks and kind of neobanks and that have launched. I mean, I think I'll say a few things right on this. I mean, the experience really mattered. I mean, the fact that we were able to build a fully digital origination process, that we discovered and designed ways for people to move, in some case, hundreds of thousands, up to $1 million in a transaction. If you take yourself back to 2008, it was very hard to send more than a couple of $1,000s in online banking, right? Second
Yeah,
factor
you're
was
right.
kind
You're
of
right.
there, but most businesses had access to do that. Consumers, Pay ID didn't exist. So we found very creative ways to verify bank accounts using like penny credits with security transaction details. We were using the direct debit system. We were using BPay to push funds in. So we had a number of ways. We even accepted checks for a digital bank, right? So there were a number of creative ways, but that's necessity is the mother of invention. So we found a number of ways
Yeah.
to do that. But importantly, being compliant, having that AUSTRAC compliant 100-point ID check, doing that all digital. I mean, that founded and created the path and platform for the neobank landscape and actually a lot of other industries. If you think about sports betting today, you can do your 100-point ID check online and open a sports betting account. So, we worked with a company back then, actually, that had an association with Deloitte called Green ID or Identity. And
Oh, yeah,
Identity
yeah, yeah.
allowed us.
We still use that today here.
Well, there you go, there you go. So I'm not as in touch with that as what I used to be, given a slight change of focus. But the fact that you could verify someone to AUSTRAC standards back then in 2008, that paved the way for an entirely digital process. Even if some of our customers did want to mail in a check every now and then, but you can see what's happened since then, and it's really exciting to see what's possible now in a digital sense. I mean, you think about how you use a physical banking network today. I mean, it's really a selective choice than it is
Yes.
through any necessity.
Yeah, it's completely changed the customer experience. Like banking today is completely different to what it was, when I
And
was
and
growing up
we
and when I
should
was starting my career, right? Yeah.
yeah we should I touched on regulation earlier in a telecom sense, right? Um, we should acknowledge when regulators get it right as well. It's easy to say, regulation, it's getting in the way, it's getting in the way. I can't do this, I can't do that. I mean, the restricted authorised deposit taking institution, the restricted ADI or RADI as it was known, was quite an important and progressive move, right, from APRA to allow neobanks to come in with some restrictions. Now they didn't all work, right? Some of them, quite infamously, but it did promote a set of innovation and really moved the needle in terms of what you needed to actually set up a digital or direct bank using those ADIs. Now, I don't know if Judo Bank did use a restricted ADI, but here's an example of a business that started, only just over a decade ago, I think, and is now a booming, business banking proposition, right? And yeah, there's been some that have come and gone, but there's been some global players that have entered our market. But for the most part, I think the banking consumer experience in Australia is right up there with the leading experiences worldwide. And I spend a lot of time in countries outside of Australia looking at the banking system, and I tell you what, the consumer experience we have down under is pretty damn good.
Well, let's give a shout out to the regulators, Monty, because they don't always get they don't always get the pats on the back. And
They
I
don't.
was an
They
early
don't. But
stage
they're
investor
folks
in
like you and I.
yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Trying to create the right balance, right, between innovation and safety. And I was an early stage investor in Zinja, which was a famous, if you like, failure in. But I think it was, in a way, like from a regulatory perspective, it was a successful failure because they actually returned every single dollar of deposits back to the consumer, and I think that was exactly what the regulators intended when they created these sort of sandbox and restricted ADI regimes. Was that not everything was going to be a success, but as long as every dollar got back to the consumer, then in a sense they had done their job effectively. Yeah.
Totally. And look, I'm not going to speak to Zinja specifically, right? But I also think, there are some examples there of, it just took too long for some of these businesses to get going, right? Back to,
Yeah,
if I
that's right. Yeah.
come back to the earlier point, right? I mean, deadline-based delivery is very powerful, and sometimes you've got to set the deadlines. If we were 1 week
Huge
late
believer
on
in that.
UBank or a month late, we would have been launching a business, a month after a competitor would have found some way to take some of these deposits, right? And it'd be a different story. And maybe UBank wouldn't exist today. I don't know, but
Wouldn't
deadline-based
exist.
delivery is very
Yeah.
powerful. Very powerful.
I'm going to switch gears to the people that were in and around some of the businesses that you've either worked in or partnered with. And I'm curious when you look at sort of key moments on each of these journeys. UBank inside NAB, Belong inside Telstra, the work you're doing at TELUS Digital. Is it the same kind of person that tends to back and sponsor these types of large-scale changes? What do they have in common? Or is there really no real sort of, if you like, mindset formula to being successful at driving and sponsoring change inside large organisations?
Look, it's a wonderful question because, I mean, firstly, I've had the absolute pleasure and privilege of working for some incredibly inspirational leaders. There'll be a number of folks who have read Good to Great, and when as I say and identify with level 4 and level 5 leadership, a lot of what I'll touch on, and I'll unpack it for those who haven't read the book, is the difference between sort of truly empowering leaders and those who lead but have a pretty helicopter approach, even though they're still very, very successful. So the number one trait of the leaders I've worked with is definitely trust and empowerment. That they're there when you need them. They'll very selectively engage on perhaps only the most serious things, but their main role is to act as a sponsor to empower you to get done what you need to get done. And that, despite their experience and skill and wisdom and general brilliance that they have, they're very, very selective of when they insert themselves in the process or the journey. Sometimes, in retrospect, you would have loved some of the skill and experience to be shared with you perhaps early in the journey, but also that's what makes a great leader, because sometimes you need to fall off your skateboard and hit your chin on the pavement to learn the next time to put your hands out and brace your fall. So I think that right balance of empowerment. I'm 46 now, Ashton, and I started my career journey at National Australia Bank in the late 90s in a contact center environment, and I met some incredible people early in that journey who, through some of my misspent youth, I was cutting code and experimenting on computers in my teenage years, and they kind of learned that I had some skills that they didn't, and I learned very quickly as the youngest of four boys with three older brothers that I could learn a lot off them as well. And so I have no doubt that I had some predisposition from my upbringing around trusting and learning from more senior and experienced folks around me, but also in my family setting, my family and my brothers were happy to learn from the things that I had and I experienced. So that two-way piece, it's often the term mentoring is often comes up, but when you have a two-way relationship with leadership, whether it's a CEO, whether it's your immediate reporting line, where there's trust, transparency, and that you both feel you're learning something, that goes a long way. That was very much a common trait. And what's interesting about those relationships that you build in business is they tend to be the ones that transcend, a particular role or job or company.
Totally.
I would say the only thing I'm more proud of than the fact that UBank and Belong exist today is that the people we built those businesses together with, we're all good friends. And we all hang
Yeah,
out. And, some people have moved to different places and you don't spend as much time with them. But, a number of the folks, will travel together every year and have a dinner somewhere to celebrate, or you get a message from someone who was on the founding team to say happy birthday. And it's not just a work chapter, it's actually a life chapter.
yeah. I had never thought about the connection between my own sort of childhood and aptitude for two-way mentoring and learning, but like I'm the youngest of three brothers, and I can 100% now, hearing you speak, I can 100% now see sort of the connection between how I showed up, as the youngest of three brothers, and how I showed up in the early stage of my career with more senior mentors and more senior leaders. Like you, I think I look back on my career and I feel very privileged to have had great leaders the whole way through, and to be good friends with a number of them still to this day. And when people ask me for career advice these days, I say choose the people you want to work with and choose the leaders you want to learn from, and don't worry about the role and don't worry about the company.
PwC, right? And in Big Four consulting, there's a bit of a golden rule, which is when you go and meet a client, you take someone with you, right? And this isn't happening on the screen, right? If it is, it's kind of synthetic, right? So I know that's not the topic of our discussion today, but I'm certainly a beneficiary of having the privilege of just meeting so many people who came from very different walks of life, who had very different experience, who helped shape me, and that I learned a lot from.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I would say it's completely on topic, Monty, because I 100% agree with you that like cultivating that mindset around being open to change, it's helped a lot by having that opportunity to build those incidental relationships, right? And I find it quite difficult, I must admit, to move horizontally across the organization in a fully virtual environment like that. Moving horizontally and actually stepping outside of your lane, so to speak, is much harder, I think, unless
Well,
you're in the
think
same
about how
physical
we met,
space. Yeah.
right?
Yes, that's right.
We met because a mutual connection said, I've met you
Hey, do you
guys,
want
spoken to you guys, and you
to?
guys should
Yeah,
come.
you
And
guys will get
what
along
was it, a
and
Friday
learn from each other.
afternoon, and
Yeah,
and you travel down to Melbourne, right? So
yeah,
we met, and so that's that's the power of connection, right? And
100%. Yeah,
if you're listening and thinking, wow, that's because someone got a plane and went somewhere, that's nothing to do whether you're at the office or not. No, it's actually about taking yourself out of one location, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours of travel to a
yeah,
different place. Because the other thing I'd say outside of work, one of the great education experiences of my life has been travel. And there is nothing more sensory loading for you than immersing yourself in a new physical environment, right? Certainly for
100%. Yeah,
myself. And so travel's been a great education on culture and respecting other cultures, and just an ongoing learning journey. I mean, I'm sitting in Singapore. Business is done,
yeah.
even in one of the most Western cities in Asia,
Differently.
right? Business is done in a very different way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I learned so much from my experience working for a Japanese company, right? I learned this concept of nemawashi, which is basically all of the real business gets done in the corridors or in the bars, to be honest, and all the meetings are ceremonial, and you can't get that lesson, if you like, from reading about it in a book. You need to experience it, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and Monty, you sort of touched on, I suppose, what it's like now being in a role that is more geographically diverse. Not a lot of younger Australians these days get to experience working in industries and roles that are global in nature, particularly in financial services. Like Australian financial services has tended back towards a domestic center of gravity, definitely in my career lifetime. And I'm just interested in hearing a little bit more about that, your current role and your time at TELUS and what that sort of taught you about doing business and driving transformation in different cultures.
TELUS is quite a remarkable company around the foresight 20 years ago to build a global digital CX business. Let's go and launch contact centers. Canadian telecom business to have that foresight and then to grow that business and keep up with the pace of change in the contact center industry to launch, an AI and data solutions business, which is fueling the largest AI tools in the world at the moment, to have a trust and safety business that is providing comfort to families, to end users, to operators of these large social networks, and then to have a world-class enterprise technology business. It's a bit of a 20-year kind of overnight success story, right? Over those 20 years, Ashton, there's been a considerable expansion, inorganic often expansion into other countries. And so really that we reached over 30 countries late last year when we added an important strategic asset in Southeast Asia. And so, I haven't actually sat down and counted how many cities or countries I've been to in my 7 years with TELUS, but I hadn't spent a lot of time in Central America, for example. So, we're one of the largest employers in Guatemala, Salvador,
Wow.
and I'd never been to either of those countries. And as an Australian, you kind of think, well, why would I go there from a business perspective? But as part of TELUS Digital, these locations are powerhouse delivery centers for us. The culture is incredible for those who are sitting here and tuning in and have spent time in Central America. Wow, what an incredible place to be. The passion is undeniable, and the skills and growth in these economies, and they're very different places to work, but they're very rewarding as well. So from whether it's Cape Town or Morocco or Brazil or Guatemala or India, or later today I'll be in Surabaya in Indonesia, right? It's the second largest city in Indonesia, and I've been going to Indonesia for 30 years and I've never been to Surabaya, right? So part of that combination of travel and learning, I don't know, I'm sure this is certainly not my quote, but that whole, when was the last time you did something for the first time? People say, don't you get tired, don't you get bored? There's definitely times where you're traveling where you don't want to be traveling. At its worst, you're always in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? From a family perspective. Otherwise, right? But at its best, you get these incredible experiences to do things that you've never done before. So the travel is it builds up, and you have to be incredibly self-disciplined. I mean, from exercise to to sleeping patterns, even just working for a North American company. I mean, we scheduled this call and podcast in a few weeks back now. Well, I didn't know I was going to be in Singapore, and so it's 5 a.m. when we start our call, but that's just part of it. So the discipline thing for me is something that I would say I had to work a lot on when I joined TELUS. In part because I was in Vancouver for a bit, and then the pandemic arrived, and all of a sudden I was back in Australia with an upside down time zone, right? And we talked earlier about necessity being the mother of invention, but I tell you, flipping the script on working at home for a Canadian telecom business, when you're starting work at midnight or 1 a.m. and finishing work at midday or 1 p.m. Was a pretty wild induction process, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for honouring the commitment, Monty.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
At 5 a.m.
It's a pleasure. To be honest, I would have woken up anyway because I only got here yesterday. So what is it now? 9 a.m. back in Melbourne, right?
That's right. Well, I'm just going to finish with one more question, if it's okay. And it's a question I ask all my guests. It's a bit more philosophical, and I'm going to ask you to sort of think back to your childhood, if it's all right. And I'd love you to reflect on whether you had any childhood beliefs that you've had to let go of to become who you are today, or to become the person or the leader who you are today.
Wow, childhood beliefs that I've let go of. I've got a lot that I've held on to that I think have served me very well. I think there's a beautiful innocence you have around goodness and general positivity. I think when you first get really burnt, you lose a bit of that innocence.
Yeah.
I think it happens well before you're in the workplace. But
Yeah.
but there are times. I mean, there are times where I've probably, I would consider myself a very optimistic person. For those who know me, they would probably say sometimes a little too optimistic. Hey, we can do this. We can do that. We can do this.
Yeah.
Anything's possible. And so, bringing that positivity, but then, and most people who aren't at that same level, what they do is serve as a wonderful balance, right? Between, the wildly audacious goal and, something a little more grounded in reality. The belief I've probably had to let go of is that some people just aren't interested in doing that at all, right? So in a work sense, what does that look like? It's very hard to create change when work for some people is purely a case of going through the motions of, perhaps unlocking something else important in life. And let me be clear, I do respect it. And that's not my philosophy. I'm sure there are parts of my career where, where work has been well and truly an enabler to do other much more important things. And to this day, of course it is, with family and the like. But I've always sought to create change and make things better, leave them better than how I inherit them. It is a little difficult for me when I encounter folks who, really don't possess any desire to kind of make things better, right? And that's not a wild transformation, right? It's just going through the motions.
No.
The folks who walk around and go, okay,
Oh, Eeyore. Eeyore.
Eeyore, right?
Yeah, Eeyores
Those
are
folks
tough.
frustrate
Eeyores
me,
are
right?
tough.
They frustrate me.
Eeyores are
So,
tough.
yeah,
Letting
go.
Well, thank you so much, Monty. I share your relentless optimism. So it's been a pleasure to chat. Thank you so much for your time. This has been the Reinventor's Mindset. Thank you, Monty.